Sidney Harman built America's audio empire. Then he lost it, twice. The amplifier critics called the best sounding in the world carried his name on the crate. He didn't own the company that built it. He was in Washington, working for a president. 57 years of amplifiers. From 15 vacuum tubes to digital room correction. Every model, in order. $5,000 in. Sold for $100 million. Bought back for $55. The last piece went for $8 billion. Harman Kardon is remembered as the American company that stood up to Japan. For 7 years, it was Japanese. In 1953, listening to music properly in your own home meant owning 4 separate machines: a tuner, a preamplifier, a power amplifier, and speakers. 4 boxes, 4 power cords, and a knot of wire behind the cabinet that almost nobody ever touched again. Hi-fi wasn't a product yet. It was a hobby. And the price of admission was knowing how to solder. Sidney Harmon had spent 14 years at the David Bogan Company watching that barrier hold. He started as an engineer and ended up running the place. He wanted Bogan to build something better for the ordinary listener. Bogan wasn't interested, so he quit and took the company's chief designer with him, Bernard Kardon. Each man put in $5,000. They opened a production line in Westbury, New York, and named the company after both of them. Their first product was a tuner, the A100. But the tuner wasn't the idea. The idea was the Festival D1000. $189.50, 15 tubes, and inside one chassis, a wideband FM tuner, a preamplifier, and a 20-watt amplifier with automatic loudness control. 4 boxes became 1. You attached speakers. That was the entire installation. Harman never forgot the demonstrations. They knocked the room flat, people trembling through Shostakovich's Fifth. Nobody, he said, had ever heard anything like that in a living room. Now, Harman Kardon usually gets credit for inventing the receiver, and that isn't quite right. Scott Radio Laboratories was building integrated sets back in the late 30s. What the D1000 did was turn that idea into something cheap enough and simple enough that someone with no technical knowledge would actually buy one. Scott built the first. Harman built the first one that mattered. By 1956, the $10,000 those two men had scraped together was worth $600,000. Kardon sold his share and retired. Harman kept going alone, and then he hired an engineer convinced that the entire industry was measuring the wrong thing. In 1959, everyone designed amplifiers for the human ear, 20 Hz at the bottom, 20,000 at the top. Nothing to hear outside that range, so nothing to build. Stuart Hegeman thought that common sense was exactly the problem. His argument went like this: an amplifier limited to the audible range doesn't even reproduce the audible range properly, because cutting off the extremes creates artifacts inside the band you can hear. If you wanted the top 20,000 Hz to sound right, you had to reach much, much further. But before that, Harman Kardon spent 5 years building something else. The D1000 was followed by the Festival D1100, 16 tubes, 30 watts, and a tuning meter next to the dial, the only easy way to tell them apart. In 1958 came the Festival TA230, built around an idea that sounds absurd today. FM stereo broadcasting didn't exist yet, so the TA230 made stereo by taking one channel from the AM band and the other from FM. 2 simultaneous broadcasts, 1 per speaker. It was one of the first stereo receivers, though not the first FM multiplex receiver. H. Scott sold that one in 1961. Harman Kardon got to the problem first, though. In 1959, it released the MA250, an adapter that turned the Ode T250 and Lyric F250 tuners into full multiplex units, 2 years before the FCC approved the standard. That same year, the A224 amplifier and the T224 tuner were the best-selling in America. The company was doing fine. And then Hegeman built something that had nothing to do with doing fine. The Citation 2. 60 watts per channel, and a frequency response of 18 to 60,000 Hz. 60,000, 3 times the ceiling of human hearing. To get there, he put 12 BY7 video pentodes in the input stage. Tubes designed for television, not audio, giving that stage a bandwidth of over a megahertz, the front end of an audio amplifier operating in radio frequency territory. On the output, a pair of KT88s per channel. It weighed 70 pounds, almost all of it in the back, in 3 massive transformers built by the Freed Company of New York, lined up along the rear of the chassis. It cost $159 as a kit, $229 assembled. Read that again. The finest tube amplifier made in America was sold in pieces for you to solder together at your kitchen table. And a great many people chose the box. A whole line was built around the tine. The Citation 1, the preamp that came first, and pushed Hegeman to build a power amp worthy of it. The 3 Anicrix tuners, the 4, another preamp, the V, a smaller power amp, and the Citation X, which wasn't an amplifier at all, but a loudspeaker. Hold on to that name, because 20 years later it comes back attached to something else entirely. 3 years later, Sidney Harman signed a deal that looked like the best move of his life. It cost him the entire company. Milton Schaap ran Gerald Electronics, a pioneer of cable television. In the early 60s, he proposed merging the two companies. Gerald brought distribution, Harman brought consumer product. And since Schaap wanted to step back to run for the Senate, Harman would be running the whole thing practically alone. The two men signed a buy-sell agreement in case they ever fell out. The clause was simple and brutal. Each would submit a bid for the company, and the higher bidder bought out the other. Schaap didn't step back. He started interfering. The arguments came. And then the moment came. Both men submitted their bids. Schaap bid higher. Harman took the money. Freshly fired from the company that carried his own name, he drove to the Berkshires and spent the weekend at a small, quiet family hotel. He had money. He had no company. What he did next makes no sense if you expected him to go back to audio. He invested in Jervis Corporation, a tiny public company with 2 factories, one making jet engine components in Michigan and one in Bolivar, Tennessee, that made rear-view mirrors for cars. Rear-view mirrors. The man who invented the receiver, buying a mirror factory. He took control, sold off the Michigan plant, and renamed the company Harman International. That name, the one riding today in 30 million cars, was born in a rear-view mirror factory, bought by a man who'd just been thrown out of his own company. And in Bolivar, he did something still taught in business schools. Workers earned free time, hit your quota early, go home early. He built a school and a daycare inside the factory. According to a Harvard case study, he overheard a worker say the line that sums the whole thing up: "I don't work for no buzzer, the buzzer works for me." Meanwhile, the technology underneath the entire industry was shifting. In 1964, Harman Kardon launched its first solid-state gear, the Citation A preamplifier, and the Citation B, a 40-watt per channel power amp running 14 transistors, with a response of 15 to 60,000 hertz. 60,000? Again. 5 years after the Citation II, tubes out and transistors in, the number didn't move. The components changed. The idea didn't. Harman regained control of the company in the late 60s and started buying JBL in 1969. In 1970 came the CAD-5, the world's first stereo cassette deck with Dolby B noise reduction. And across the Pacific, 4 companies were about to start a numbers war that would flatten nearly every American hi-fi maker. By the early 70s, buying a receiver in America had turned into an argument about a single number. Pioneer, Sansui, Marantz, Kenwood. Every season, more watts. The units got bigger, and the salesman showed you the big number. They called them monster receivers, and the name was literal. Harman Kardon looked at all that and released a 25-watt receiver. Their design principle, in their own words, promise less, deliver more. When solid state arrived, they'd moved fast, starting with the Stratophonic series, the SR300, SR400, SR600, and SR900, each with a B version. The SR900 was among the first fully transistorized hi-fi receivers in existence, and the first to claim a response of 5 to 100,000 hertz. 100,000. The citations reached 60. 12 years after Hegeman, the obsession hadn't just survived, it had escalated. Then came the Nocturne series, the 200, 210, 230, 330, 520, 530, 720, and 820, and starting in 1969, the series that would define everything, the X30. 10 models between 1969 and 1979, from 10 watts per channel to 45. It began with the 230 and 330, continued with the 630 and 930, and ended with the 430 and 730. From the 430 up, they all carried the same words under the logo, twin-powered. And here's the part that matters, because almost everyone tells it wrong. Twin power didn't mean 2 channels. It meant each channel had its own power transformer, its own rectifier, and its own filter capacitors. 2 complete power supplies inside one box. In practice, 2 monoblocks. In the 70s, you found that in high-end separates, and Harman Kardon was putting it in a mid-priced receiver. Marantz advertised something called dual power. Not the same thing. That design used 2 secondary windings off a single transformer. 1 transformer, 2 taps. The Harman Kardon carried 2 real transformers. That's why a 25-watt 430 could drive speakers that embarrassed receivers with 3 times the number on the faceplate. Watts weren't the constraint. The power supply was. The 430 reached from 4 to 140,000 hertz, with the house signature, the green dial glow. Its siblings, the 30-watt 630 and the 45-watt 930, and the 730, which replaced the 930 in 1976, with 5 fewer watts and everything else better. Direct coupling, dual phono inputs, response out to 130,000 hertz. It's the most sought after of the 4, and, rebadged, it's sold at Montgomery Ward as the Model 450. In separates, the Citation line did the same job. The Citation 11 preamp and the Citation 12 power amp, 60 watts per channel with a dual mono supply, plus a 12 deluxe version. And around them, the 13, the 14, the 15, the 17, the 17S, the 18, and the 19. That last one, 100 watts per channel. All of this, refusing the Watts war, the twin transformers, the green glow, is the image people keep of Harman Kardon, the American company that didn't take the Japanese bait. There's one detail almost nobody mentions. The 430 and the 730, the 2 best-loved receivers in the series, weren't built in America. They were built for Harman Kardon by a Japanese company. It was called Shin Shirasuna. Remember the name. In 1976, Harman Kardon did something it hadn't done in 20 years. It built the most powerful amplifier in its history, 150 watts per channel into 8 ohms, measured to the FTC standard, at less than 0.05% distortion. After 2 decades of preaching that the big number didn't matter, they released a big number, but on their own terms. Because the 150 watts were, as always in this house, a lie by understatement. On the bench, the Citation 16 didn't clip until past 170. Into 4 ohms it delivered 250 per channel. Bridge to mono, 500. Now the spec that explains the whole machine. Its power bandwidth ran from half a hertz to 110,000 hertz. Half a hertz, below anything a speaker can move. And at the top, 5 times the limit of hearing. 17 years after the Citation 2, Hageman's obsession was still written into the spec sheet. Inside, it's 2 completely separate amplifiers, each with its own transformer, in one chassis. Twin power carried to its logical conclusion. And outside, the decision that made it unmistakable. Nearly every serious amplifier in 1976 had needles. Harman Kardon removed them and installed LEDs, but not in 2 columns. They arranged them in a V, and they don't work like a light that's simply on or off. They have variable brightness. Each LED dims or brightens with the amplifier's actual output. There are 3 versions. The original Citation 16, with an integrated circuit at the input and more dynamic power. The 16A, fully discrete with lower distortion, and the industrial 16AS, which is a 16A without the meters. A 16 Pro variant exists as well. This was the highest point Harman Kardon ever reached as an American hi-fi manufacturer, an amplifier that measured better than it promised, built by a company that had spent 23 years refusing to play everyone else's game. And that same year, Sidney Harman sold the company. Sidney Harman didn't sell because the company was struggling. He sold because he was offered an office in Washington. Jimmy Carter had won, and he wanted Harman at the Commerce Department as undersecretary. What made him attractive wasn't amplifiers, it was Bolivar. That rearview mirror factory had made him the American businessman who knew more about labor relations than anyone outside a union. But the law was clear. A senior official couldn't hold direct business interests in a company's daily operations. So he put his company up for sale. Beatrice Foods bought it, $100 million. Beatrice was a Chicago conglomerate that bought things. It wasn't an audio company and didn't intend to become one. And it started selling off the pieces. They carved the company up and mismanaged what they kept. By the time they were done, about 60% of the original organization remained, and sales had fallen 40%. And in the late 70s, Beatrice sold the original Harman Kardon division, the company the 2 partners had founded, with $5,000 each in Westbury, New York. The buyer was Shin Shirasuna Electric. The same name you've been hearing for 20 minutes, the Japanese company already building the 430 and the 730. Beatrice didn't sell Harman Kardon to a stranger. It sold it to the supplier. Shin Shirasuna sold in Japan under its own brand, Silver. From that moment, Harman Kardon was one of its product lines. So here's the answer. The company that refused to fight the Watts war against the Japanese. The one that put in 2 transformers where Marantz put 1. The one that spent 20 years as the argument that America could still build amplifiers, became Japanese property. For 7 years. and Sidney Harmon watched it from Washington, unable to touch anything, while Beatrice drove his company toward ruin. When the Carter presidency ended, he went to get it back. In 1980, he bought Harman International from Beatrice for $55 million, half of what he'd been paid, for a company missing 40% of itself. Except he didn't get back what he'd come for. The receiver group wasn't in the deal, because Beatrice no longer owned it. That group was the heart of Harman International. It was, literally, Harman Kardon. What Sidney Harman bought in 1980 was essentially JBL and a few international distributors. He had the name, he didn't have the company. It took 5 more years. In 1985, he bought the original Harman Kardon operation from Shin Shirasuna and returned the company to its pre-1976 form. It's worth pausing on that sentence, because it sounds smaller than it was. This is the 80s, the peak of American anxiety about Japanese industry, when the flow ran in exactly one direction. The Harman Kardon buyback was one of the very few acquisitions of a Japanese electronics company by an American firm in the entire decade. A man getting his own name back by buying it from Japan. And while all of this was happening, while the brand changed hands, and countries, and hands again, somewhere, in some workshop, someone was building the finest amplifier Harman Kardon would ever make. In 1970, a Finnish engineer published a paper in an IEPE journal that rearranged how people thought about transistor amplifiers. Volume 18, Number 3, September 1970. His name was Matti Otala. What he described was this: amplifiers were measured with steady tones. Feed in a tone, measure the distortion, publish the figure. And by that method, transistor amps measured magnificently. Figures tubes couldn't come near. But music isn't steady tones. It's transients, attacks, hits, sudden starts. And Otala showed that when the signal changed very fast, the negative feedback keeping those figures so clean arrived late. For that instant, the amplifier generated distortion, then recovered in time for the measuring equipment to see nothing. He called it transient intermodulation distortion, TIM. It's the technical explanation for an aesthetic complaint that had been circulating for years. Why transistors measured better than tubes and, to many ears, sounded worse. It wasn't nostalgia. The industry was measuring with the wrong tool. Otala spent the following years working out how to eliminate it. In 1978, Harman Kardon launched a project framed as the absolute amplifier, no-cost ceiling. One goal: the best possible measurements and the best perceived sound, and they put Otala in charge. It reached the catalog in 1980. It was called the Citation XX. The editors of the Audio Critic called it the best-sounding power amplifier in the world. And that wasn't brochure copy. It was the meeting point of two ideas that had taken 20 years to converge: the bandwidth obsession Hageman built into the Citation II, and Otala's theory of what happens when the signal changes too fast. It was joined by the Citation XXP preamp, and shortly after by a smaller combo, the Citation XI and X2. There's the name I asked you to hold on to. The Citation X of 1960 was a Hageman loudspeaker. The XI and X2 of the 80s are amplification. Same name, 2 decades apart, no relation, the easiest designation trap in this brand's entire history. So far, the version everyone knows. Greatest American amplifier of all time, designed by a Finnish genius for the brand that refused to surrender. Now look at the date again. The project starts in 1978, ships in 1980, and Sidney Harman doesn't get Harman Kardon back until 1985. In those years, the company wasn't his. It wasn't American. It belonged to Shin Shirasuna Electric. And according to the archives of the Vintage Knob, the most complete reference on vintage gear, the electronic design of the Citation XX wasn't handled by a team in New York. It was handled by a Japanese engineer, Mamoru Sekiya, at Shin Shirasuna, with Otala's engineering recommendations folded into the final design. Sekiya holds a senior position at Onkyo today. The shipping crates, though, said what they'd always said. Produced by Harman Kardon, Woodbury, New York, USA. The finest amplifier ever to carry Sidney Harman's name was conceived with Finnish theory, Japanese engineering, and an American label, in the only period when its founder had no say in the company at all. The brand that survived the Japanese invasion made its masterpiece while it was Japanese. And the last part has to be said, because the people who own one know it. In 1983 testing, the pair delivered superb quality, very low distortion, enormous bandwidth, but the modules failed over time from thermal problems. The absolute amplifier had a flaw that emerged with the years. Today you practically never see one. Sidney Harman got his company back in 1985. He had 26 years left to live, and one more thing to build. What he got back in 1985 wasn't what he'd sold. Harman International was billing around $80 million in 1981. He went shopping, Blu-ray, Soundcraft, Infinity, and by 1989, it was past 500. Meanwhile, the Citation line was reaching its end. The last were the Citation 21 and 22, carrying the full Otala treatment. The 22 delivered 200 watts per channel, and the pair cost $1,700 in 1993. By then, Otala was gone, off to Nokia, designing mobile phones. Around them, the final numbers of the series, the Citation 23, the 24, and the 25. And with the 21 and 22, a line closes that began in 1959 with television tubes, and ran through the Citation IIB, through the first transistors, through the giants of the 70s, and through Otala's absolute amplifier. In 1993, Harman Kardon retired the Citation name. Similar products continued until 1997, and there the trail goes cold. Harman in America went all in on home theater. High-end stereo stayed in Europe. 12 years passed. In 2009, it came back, with the most powerful unit the company had ever built. The HK990, 150 watts per channel, digital room correction, dual subwoofer outputs, balanced inputs. It won the ASA Award for Best European Amplifier of 2009 to 2010, and there's a technical verdict on it that closes the whole circle. It's the best implementation of Otala's design rules of anything sold in real quantity in the United States. 29 years after the Citation XX, the fins theory was still the foundation. Sidney Harmon died on April 12, 2011, in Washington, at 92, a month after a leukemia diagnosis. He was active to the end. He'd earned his doctorate at 55, and in August 2010, 2 days before turning 92, he bought Newsweek from the Washington Post Company for $1, assuming $47 million in liabilities. 6 years after his death, Samsung bought Harman International for $8 billion. And here's the number that tells you what had really happened to the company. Of the $7 billion Harman billed in the 12 months before the deal, roughly 65% came from automotive. 30 million cars were driving around with its systems inside. The company Sidney Harman founded to put real sound in the American living room sold for $8 billion. And 2/3 of that business was dashboards. Though it isn't exactly a betrayal, Harman International wasn't born in an audio lab. It was born when a man who'd just been thrown out of his own company bought a rear-view mirror factory in Bolivar, Tennessee, and put his name on it. The name had belonged to the car industry all along. It just took 50 years to come home. Sidney Harman lost his company twice, and twice he got it back. That makes him the exception, because the names that appear in this story as rivals, Marantz, Fisher, Scott, Sansui, had the same kind of decade. Conglomerates, foreign buyers, brands that outlived the companies that created them. Almost none of those founders ever held their own name again. And the one most like Harman, same country, same years, same obsession with building things right, ended the opposite way. That story is right here.